That struck me as odd. Lieutenant Commander Johnson made notes while Jake spoke. Did you hear the exact words that were exchanged? Jake recounted the conversation as accurately as he could remember. He described Rodriguez demanding to know what Admiral Chen was doing there, her calm responses, and the escalating anger in Rodriguez's voice and demeanor. Tell us about the moment when physical contact occurred, Johnson said. This was the part Jake had been dreading. He knew his description of the push could be crucial in determining the charges against Rodriguez. He took his time, wanting to be as accurate as possible. Rodriguez was getting more and more agitated, Jake explained. The Admiral remained calm the whole time, which seemed to make him even angrier. Then he said something like, maybe you should learn your place, and suddenly he reached out and shoved her hard in the shoulder. He called her a brat when he did it. Can you describe the force of the push? Johnson asked. It was hard enough to make her stumble backward a few steps, Jake replied. It wasn't just a light touch, he put real force behind it. If she hadn't caught her balance quickly, she would have fallen. Admiral Chen nodded slightly. What was your reaction to seeing this happen? Jake considered the question carefully. I was shocked, Admiral. Even though I didn't know who you were at that moment, I knew that pushing anyone in a military facility was completely inappropriate. But when you showed your identification, and I realized Rodriguez had just assaulted an admiral, Jake shook his head. I've never seen anyone's face change so fast. He went from angry to terrified in about 2 seconds. The questions continued for another 30 minutes. They asked about Rodriguez's general behavior during boot camp, whether Jake had witnessed any other incidents of aggression or poor judgment, and his assessment of Rodriguez's character and attitude toward authority. Recruit Morrison, Commander Hayes interjected. You've been in the same company as Rodriguez since the beginning of boot camp. In your opinion, was this incident completely out of character for him, or does it fit a pattern of behavior you've observed? Jake felt uncomfortable being asked to essentially testify about a fellow recruit's character, but he knew he had a duty to be honest. Ma'am, Rodriguez has always had a quick temper. He's gotten into arguments with other recruits over small things, and he doesn't handle frustration well. The drill instructors have had to correct him multiple times for losing his military bearing when things don't go his way. Can you give us specific examples? Johnson asked. Jake described several incidents he had witnessed. Rodriguez arguing with another recruit over bunk assignments, his angry outbursts during difficult training exercises, and his tendency to blame others when he struggled with material or physical challenges. Each incident individually seemed minor, but taken together they painted a picture of someone who struggled with self-control and respect for authority. Has Rodriguez ever been violent or physically aggressive before this incident? Admiral Chen asked. Not that I've seen directly, Jake replied. But there have been a couple of times when I thought he might be. Last week during hand-to-hand combat training, he got really rough with his sparring partner over what should have been a routine exercise. The instructor had to step in and remind him about control and discipline. Lieutenant Commander Johnson made more notes. Recruit Morrison, I need to ask you about something that may be difficult to answer. Some witnesses have suggested that Rodriguez's behavior toward Admiral Chen may have been influenced by her gender, that he might not have acted the same way toward a male officer. Do you have any opinion on that? Jake thought carefully about the question. It was something he had wondered about himself over the past 3 days. Would Rodriguez have been as quick to dismiss and ultimately assault a man? It was impossible to know for certain, but Jake had his suspicions. I think that might have been part of it, Jake said slowly. Rodriguez has made comments before about women not belonging in certain roles in the military. Nothing too extreme, but enough to make it clear he has some old-fashioned ideas about gender roles. When he saw what he thought was a civilian woman getting coffee in a military facility, I think those attitudes might have influenced how he reacted. Admiral Chen's expression remained neutral, but Jake caught a flicker of something in her eyes. Whether it was anger, disappointment, or simply acknowledgement of an unfortunate reality, he couldn't tell. The interview continued with questions about the aftermath of the incident, Senior Chief Williams' response, Admiral Chen's address to the recruits, and the general atmosphere among the company since Tuesday morning. Jake described how the incident had affected morale and behavior among his fellow recruits. Everyone's been walking on eggshells since it happened, Jake explained. We're all more careful about how we interact with people we don't recognize, and there's been a lot of discussion about respect and military bearing. Some guys are worried that we'll all be punished because one recruit screwed up so badly. Has anyone expressed support for Rodriguez or suggested that his actions were justified? Johnson asked. Jake shook his head firmly. No, sir, absolutely not. Everyone I've talked to thinks he was completely out of line. Most people can't believe he was stupid enough to push someone without even knowing who they were, regardless of whether they were military or civilian. Commander Hayes looked at her notes. Recruit Morrison, you mentioned that this incident has led to discussions among the recruits about respect and military bearing. Can you elaborate on that? Yes, ma'am. A lot of guys have been talking about the Admiral's speech after the incident. She talked about treating everyone with dignity and respect, and about not making assumptions based on appearance. It really made people think about their own attitudes and behavior. Jake paused, remembering some of the conversations he had heard in the barracks. Some recruits have admitted that they've made similar assumptions about people based on how they look or dress. The incident made them realize how wrong that kind of thinking can be, especially in the military, where you might encounter people from all kinds of backgrounds and in various types of uniforms. Admiral Chen leaned back in her chair. What impact do you think this incident will have on your company's training and development? I think it's actually been educational, Admiral, Jake replied honestly. Obviously not in a way anyone would have wanted, but seeing the immediate consequences of poor judgment and lack of discipline has been more effective than any classroom lecture could have been. Everyone understands now that military bearing and respect aren't just abstract concepts, they're essential skills that can determine your entire future. Lieutenant Commander Johnson looked up from his notes. Recruit Morrison, is there anything else you think we should know about this incident or about Rodriguez's character and behavior that we haven't already discussed?
Jake thought for a moment.
Just that I hope this doesn't reflect badly on our entire company or on the training program here. Most of the recruits are good people who are working hard to become better sailors. Rodriguez's actions were his own choice, and they don't represent the rest of us. Admiral Chen smiled slightly for the first time during the interview. That's a very mature perspective, Recruit Morrison. The fact that you're concerned about your fellow recruits and the reputation of your training company shows exactly the kind of character and leadership potential the Navy is looking for. The interview concluded with administrative details about Jake's statement and instructions about confidentiality during the ongoing investigation. Lieutenant Commander Johnson explained that Jake might be called to testify at a formal hearing if the case went to court-martial, and that he should continue to focus on his training and not discuss the case with other recruits. As Jake prepared to leave the office, Admiral Chen addressed him one final time. Recruit Morrison, you handled yourself very well during this interview. Your honesty and attention to detail will be valuable to this investigation. More importantly, your understanding of the lessons to be learned from this unfortunate incident gives me confidence in the quality of sailors being trained at this facility. Thank you, Admiral, Jake replied, coming to attention. I just hope justice is served appropriately and that we can all learn from what happened. Walking back to his barracks after the interview, Jake felt a mixture of relief and responsibility. Relief that the questioning was over and that he had apparently handled it well, but responsibility for the role his testimony would play in determining Rodriguez's fate. He knew that his words, combined with those of other witnesses, would help decide whether Rodriguez faced court-martial, prison time, and dishonorable discharge. That evening, as Jake lay in his bunk thinking about the day's events, he realized that the incident had changed him in ways he was still discovering. He had always thought of military service in terms of adventure and honor, but now he understood that it was also about character and judgment in moments when no one was looking. The difference between Rodriguez and himself wasn't necessarily talent or intelligence. It was the ability to control emotions and treat others with respect, regardless of the circumstances. The investigation would continue for several more days, but Jake's role in it was essentially complete. He had told the truth about what he witnessed, and now he had to trust the military justice system to handle the rest. As he drifted off to sleep, Jake found himself hoping that somehow good would come from the terrible mistake that had destroyed one man's future and changed the perspective of everyone who witnessed it. 2 weeks after the incident, Jake Morrison stood in formation with his fellow recruits in the main assembly hall of the Naval Training Center. The atmosphere was different than usual, more formal, more solemn. Word had spread that morning that the investigation into Rodriguez's assault on Admiral Chen was complete, and that the results would be announced to the entire recruit population as part of what the command staff called a continuing education opportunity. Jake's stomach churned with nervous energy as he waited for the proceedings to begin. He had tried not to think too much about Rodriguez over the past few days, focusing instead on his own training and preparation for graduation from boot camp, but the approaching announcement brought back all the emotions and questions he had been trying to suppress. The hall fell silent as Admiral Chen entered, followed by Commander Hayes, Senior Chief Williams, and several other officers Jake didn't recognize. Admiral Chen walked with the same calm confidence she had displayed during the mess hall incident, showing no signs that the assault had affected her personally or professionally. Jake found himself admiring her composure under what must have been difficult circumstances. Commander Hayes called the assembly to attention, and nearly 800 recruits snapped into position simultaneously. The sound of their unified movement echoed through the large hall, creating an atmosphere of military precision that Jake had come to associate with important moments during his training. "At ease," Admiral Chen commanded as she stepped to the podium. Her voice carried easily throughout the hall, and Jake noticed that every recruit was hanging on her words. The incident had made her something of a legendary figure among the trainees, the admiral who had handled an assault with dignity and used it as a teaching moment. 2 weeks ago, Admiral Chen began, this facility experienced an incident that called into question everything we try to teach you about military bearing, respect for authority, and basic human decency. Today, I am here to inform you of the resolution of that incident, and to ensure that the lessons learned are not forgotten as you complete your training and begin your naval careers. Jake felt his pulse quicken. This was the moment they had all been waiting for. The official word on what had happened to Rodriguez, and what it meant for all of them. Recruit Miguel Rodriguez has been found guilty by court-martial of assault on a superior officer, conduct unbecoming a military member, and failure to maintain military discipline, Admiral Chen announced. He has been sentenced to 6 months in military prison, reduction in rank to the lowest enlisted grade, forfeiture of all pay and allowances, and discharge from the United States Navy under other than honorable conditions. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Naval Training Center as hundreds of recruits marched toward the mess hall. Their boots hit the concrete in perfect rhythm, creating a thunderous beat that echoed off the surrounding buildings. Among them was Jake Morrison, a 20-year-old from small-town Texas who had joined the Navy with dreams of adventure and honor. His uniform was crisp, his posture straight, but his stomach growled loudly enough to make his bunkmate chuckle. "Chow time, Morrison," whispered his friend Danny Chen, trying not to break formation. "Hope it's better than yesterday's mystery meat." Jake nodded, keeping his eyes forward as they approached the massive dining facility. The smell of bacon and coffee wafted through the air, making his mouth water. He had been up since 4:30 that morning for physical training, and the grueling workout had left him famished. All he could think about was getting his tray and finding a quiet spot to eat before their next training session began. The mess hall was a chaos of organized movement. Hundreds of recruits lined up with their metal trays, moving through the serving line with military precision. The kitchen staff worked efficiently, spooning portions of scrambled eggs, bacon, toast, and oatmeal onto each tray. The noise was deafening, clanking trays, shouting orders, and the constant chatter of hungry young sailors. Jake grabbed his tray and moved through the line quickly. His drill instructor had emphasized the importance of eating fast and getting back to training. There was always something to do, somewhere to be, and being late was not an option in boot camp. He loaded his tray with everything available, knowing he would need the energy for the day ahead. As he turned to find a seat, Jake's attention was caught by a commotion near the coffee station. You will encounter people you don't understand, situations that frustrate you, and circumstances that test your character in ways you cannot imagine. How you respond in those moments will define not just your career, but your worth as human beings and representatives of this great institution. The Admiral's words resonated deeply with Jake. Over the past 2 weeks, he had thought often about the choices that led to Rodriguez's downfall. It wasn't just the physical assault. It was the series of assumptions, judgments, and emotional reactions that preceded it. Rodriguez had chosen to see an enemy instead of a fellow human being, and that choice had destroyed his future. "The Navy expects more from you than technical competence and physical courage," Admiral Chen continued. "We expect intellectual honesty, emotional maturity, and the wisdom to treat every person with dignity and respect, regardless of their appearance, background, or position. These are not just military requirements, they are the foundations of decent society." Jake thought about his own background, a small town in Texas where diversity was limited and traditional attitudes about gender roles and authority were common. Boot camp had already challenged many of his preconceptions about people and leadership. Seeing women in positions of authority, working alongside recruits from completely different backgrounds, and learning to function as part of a diverse team had been educational in ways he hadn't expected. Admiral Chen was now discussing the specific lessons to be learned from the Rodriguez incident. She talked about the danger of making assumptions based on appearance, the importance of emotional self-control, and the absolute necessity of respecting all people regardless of rank or position. "Some of you may be wondering why I was not in uniform that morning," she said, addressing a question Jake knew many recruits had been discussing. "I was conducting what we call a plainclothes inspection, observing normal operations without the influence that comes from everyone knowing a flag officer is present. It's a valuable tool for understanding how military personnel really behave when they think no one important is watching." Jake realized the brilliance of this approach. Rodriguez's behavior that morning was probably typical of how he acted when he thought there would be no consequences. The assault might never have happened if Admiral Chen had been in uniform, but the underlying attitudes and character flaws would have remained hidden until they manifested in some other way. "The recruit who assaulted me revealed his true character that morning," Admiral Chen explained. Admiral Chen explained his willingness to be disrespectful and physically aggressive toward what he believed was a civilian woman showed a fundamental lack of honor and discipline that made him unfit for military service. The fact that he only showed concern when he learned my rank proved that his respect was conditional and therefore worthless. These words hit Jake particularly hard. He thought about times in his own life when he had shown different levels of respect to different people based on their perceived importance or authority. The Admiral's point was clear. True character meant treating everyone with dignity, not just those who could affect your future. Commander Hayes stepped forward to address the recruits about the administrative aspects of the case and its impact on their training schedule. She explained that the incident had triggered a comprehensive review of boot camp procedures and training curriculum to ensure that character development received even greater emphasis in future programs. "This facility has trained tens of thousands of sailors over the years," Commander Hayes said. "The vast majority have gone on to serve with honor and distinction. One individual's failure does not reflect on this institution or on your fellow recruits. However, it does provide us with an opportunity to reinforce the standards and values that make the United States Navy the finest maritime force in the world." Jake appreciated Commander Hayes's words, but he wondered if the incident would have lasting effects on how the training center was perceived. Would future inspections be more frequent? Would recruits be under increased scrutiny? He hoped that the lessons learned would improve the program without creating an atmosphere of suspicion and distrust. As the formal announcement concluded, Admiral Chen made an unexpected request. She asked for volunteers from the recruit population to participate in a new mentorship program designed to help future sailors navigate difficult situations and make ethical decisions under pressure. "I want you to understand that leadership is not just about giving orders," she explained. "It's about helping others become better versions of themselves. The recruit who assaulted me was failed not just by his own poor character, but by a system that didn't identify and address his problems before they led to serious consequences." Jake found himself raising his hand before he had fully thought through the decision. Something about Admiral Chen's words had struck a chord with him. Maybe it was the memory of Rodriguez's terrified face when he realized his mistake, or maybe it was his own desire to ensure that other young sailors didn't make similar errors. Either way, he wanted to be part of the solution. Several dozen other recruits also volunteered, and Jake felt proud to be among them. These were people who had witnessed the same incident he had, and had drawn similar conclusions about the importance of character and leadership in military service. After the assembly, Jake was approached by Senior Chief Williams, who had apparently noticed his volunteer gesture. The senior enlisted man had been a constant presence throughout boot camp, but Jake had never had a personal conversation with him. "Recruit Morrison," Senior Chief Williams said, "I understand you were one of the primary witnesses to the incident with Rodriguez." "Yes, Senior Chief," Jake replied, coming to attention. "At ease," Williams said with a slight smile. "I wanted to thank you for your honesty and professionalism during the investigation. Your testimony was clear, accurate, and helpful in ensuring that justice was served appropriately." Jake felt a surge of pride at the praise, but also a continued sense of responsibility. "Senior Chief, I just told the truth about what I saw. I hope it was helpful." "It was more than helpful," Williams replied. "But I also wanted to ask you about your decision to volunteer for the mentorship program. That's a significant commitment that will require additional training and responsibility. Are you prepared for that?" Jake thought about the question seriously. He was already struggling to keep up with the demanding schedule of boot camp, and adding mentorship duties would mean even less free time and more pressure. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw Rodriguez's face at the moment he realized what he had done. If Jake could help prevent even one other sailor from making such a catastrophic mistake, the extra work would be worth it. "Yes, Senior Chief," Jake replied firmly. "I think what happened to Rodriguez could have been prevented if someone had helped him understand the importance of self-control and respect earlier in his training. If I can help other recruits avoid his mistakes, I want to do that." Senior Chief Williams nodded approvingly. "That's the right attitude, Morrison. The mentorship program will begin after you graduate from boot camp and report to your first duty station. You'll receive additional training on counseling techniques, conflict resolution, and leadership development. It's challenging work, but it's some of the most important service you can provide to the Navy." As Jake walked back to his barracks that evening, he reflected on how much had changed since that morning in the mess hall 2 weeks ago. He had witnessed a man destroy his future in a moment of anger and poor judgment. He had participated in a military investigation and learned about the serious business of military justice. Most importantly, he had discovered something about his own character and his desire to help others avoid similar mistakes. The final weeks of boot camp passed quickly after the announcement. Jake threw himself into his studies and physical training with renewed purpose, but he also paid closer attention to his fellow recruits. He noticed when people seemed frustrated or angry, and he tried to be a positive influence during difficult moments. Several times he was able to diffuse minor conflicts before they escalated into more serious problems. On graduation day, Jake stood in formation wearing his dress blue uniform and feeling proud of what he had accomplished. Admiral Chen was present for the ceremony, and when she congratulated Jake personally, she mentioned his volunteer service and expressed confidence in his future as both a sailor and a leader. "The incident that brought us together was unfortunate," she said, "but your response to it gives me great hope for the future of the Navy. Young sailors like you who understand that service is about character as much as competence are exactly what this institution needs." As Jake prepared to leave for his first duty assignment, he carried with him the lessons learned from witnessing Rodriguez's fall from grace. He understood now that military service was not just about technical skills and physical courage. It was about becoming the kind of person others could trust and respect under any circumstances. Years later, as a seasoned sailor and eventually an officer himself, Jake would tell the story of the recruit who pushed an admiral to young sailors under his command. He would use it as a teaching tool to emphasize the importance of character, self-control, and respect for all people. And he would always remember that sometimes the most valuable lessons come from witnessing someone else's failure and choosing to learn from it rather than repeat it. The incident that began with a moment of anger and poor judgment in a Navy mess hall had become a catalyst for positive change in the lives of hundreds of sailors who witnessed it or heard about it. Rodriguez's career had ended in disgrace, but his mistake had inadvertently contributed to making the Navy a better institution. It was a sobering reminder that every choice has consequences, and that character is revealed not in moments of comfort, but in times of stress and challenge. A small figure in what appeared to be civilian clothes was standing there, seemingly lost among the sea of uniformed recruits. The person was petite, with short dark hair, and looked completely out of place in the military environment. Jake couldn't quite make out if it was a man or woman from his position, but something about the situation bothered him. "What's that civilian doing here?" he muttered to himself, balancing his full tray while trying to get a better look. The figure was reaching for a coffee cup when another recruit, a large guy from Jake's company named Rodriguez, suddenly appeared behind them. Rodriguez was known for his quick temper and his tendency to take charge in any situation. He had been struggling with the discipline required in boot camp and often took his frustrations out on others. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" Rodriguez barked at the small figure. "This is for Navy personnel only. You don't belong here." Jake watched as the situation unfolded. The person in civilian clothes turned around and Jake could see it was a woman, probably in her 40s, with calm brown eyes and an air of quiet confidence that seemed at odds with her small stature. She didn't seem intimidated by Rodriguez's aggressive tone, which only seemed to anger him more. "I said, what are you doing here?" Rodriguez repeated, stepping closer and raising his voice. Several other recruits had stopped to watch the confrontation, creating a small crowd around the coffee station. The woman's voice was steady and controlled when she finally spoke. "I'm just getting some coffee. Is there a problem?" Her calm response seemed to infuriate Rodriguez even more. Jake could see the veins bulging in the bigger man's neck as his face turned red with anger. This was exactly the kind of situation their drill instructors had warned them about. Letting emotions override military bearing and discipline. "The problem is that you don't belong here," Rodriguez snarled. "This is a military facility, and you're just some civilian who wandered in where you don't belong. Maybe you should learn your place." Jake felt uncomfortable watching the scene unfold. Something didn't seem right about the situation, but he couldn't quite put his finger on what it was. The woman's demeanor was too calm, too composed for someone who was supposedly lost or in the wrong place. There was something about her bearing that reminded him of his drill instructors, a quiet authority that came from years of experience and command. But Rodriguez was too angry to notice these subtle signs. His frustration with boot camp, combined with what he perceived as disrespect from a civilian, had pushed him over the edge. Jake watched in horror as Rodriguez suddenly reached out and shoved the woman hard in the shoulder. "I said get out of here, you brat," Rodriguez shouted as the woman stumbled backward from the unexpected push. The mess hall seemed to go silent for a moment. Even the kitchen staff stopped their work to see what was happening. Jake felt his stomach drop as he realized the magnitude of what had just occurred. Putting his hands on anyone in a military facility was a serious offense, but pushing a civilian, especially a woman, was career-ending behavior. The woman regained her balance quickly, her expression never changing from that calm, controlled demeanor. But something in her eyes had shifted. Jake caught a glimpse of steel beneath the surface, a hardness that spoke of years of command and authority. She straightened her shoulders and looked directly at Rodriguez with a gaze that could have frozen fire. "Recruit," she said quietly, but her voice carried across the suddenly silent mess hall like a whip crack. "Do you know who I am?" Rodriguez's face was still flushed with anger, but Jake could see a flicker of uncertainty cross his features. Something in the woman's tone had penetrated his rage, and for the first time, he seemed to really look at her. The way she stood, the authority in her voice, the complete lack of fear in her eyes, it was all starting to add up to something that made Rodriguez's face go pale. I don't," Rodriguez stammered, suddenly seeming much smaller than his imposing physical frame would suggest. The woman reached into her jacket and pulled out a small leather wallet. She flipped it open to reveal a military identification card, and Jake's blood ran cold as he caught sight of the rank insignia. Even from his position several feet away, he could make out the distinctive stars that marked her as a flag officer, an admiral in the United States Navy. The silence in the mess hall was now complete and deafening. Every recruit, every kitchen worker, every staff member present was staring at the scene unfolding near the coffee station. Jake's tray suddenly felt incredibly heavy in his hands as the full weight of what had just happened began to sink in. Admiral Sarah Chen, though Jake didn't know her name yet, held up her identification for Rodriguez to see clearly. Her voice remained calm and controlled, but there was an unmistakable edge of command authority that made everyone in earshot stand straighter unconsciously. "I am Admiral Chen, United States Navy," she said clearly. "I am here for a surprise inspection of this facility and its training programs. Would you care to explain to me why you just physically assaulted a superior officer?" Rodriguez's face had gone from red to white, to a sickly green color. His mouth opened and closed several times, but no sound came out. Jake could see the man's hands trembling as the full magnitude of his actions hit him like a freight train. In the span of 30 seconds, Rodriguez had gone from an angry recruit to someone facing potential court-martial, dishonorable discharge, and possibly criminal charges. The mess hall remained frozen in stunned silence. Jake looked around at his fellow recruits and saw his own shock and horror reflected in their faces. They had all witnessed a career-ending moment, and many of them were probably wondering if they would somehow be held responsible for not intervening. Admiral Chen closed her identification and returned it to her jacket pocket. Her movements were deliberate and controlled, and Jake couldn't help but admire her composure under what must have been an incredibly frustrating situation. She had come to conduct an inspection and instead had been physically assaulted by one of the recruits she was there to observe. "Well?" she asked Rodriguez, who was still standing there in stunned silence. "I'm waiting for an explanation." Jake watched as Rodriguez tried to form words. The big recruit's earlier bravado had completely evaporated, replaced by the dawning realization that he had just destroyed his naval career before it had really begun. Sweat was beading on his forehead despite the cool morning air, and his breathing had become shallow and rapid. "Admiral, I didn't know," Rodriguez finally managed to stammer out. "I thought you were, you're not in uniform, and I didn't realize." Admiral Chen's expression didn't change. "So your excuse is that you assaulted what you believe to be a civilian woman who was doing nothing more than getting coffee. Is that really the defense you want to go with, recruit?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Jake realized that Rodriguez had just made his situation even worse by essentially admitting that he would assault an innocent civilian. There was no good answer to the Admiral's question, and everyone in the mess hall knew it. At that moment, Senior Chief Petty Officer Williams burst through the mess hall doors. He had obviously been alerted to the situation by someone and was moving fast toward the confrontation. Jake had learned to respect and fear Senior Chief Williams during his time in boot camp. The man was a 25-year Navy veteran who had seen combat in 3 different conflicts and had a reputation for being absolutely no nonsense when it came to discipline and military bearing. Senior Chief Williams took one look at the scene. Rodriguez standing there sweating and pale, Admiral Chen with her calm but steely expression, and the 100 or so recruits frozen in place with their breakfast trays. And Jake could see him immediately assess the situation. His experienced eyes took in every detail, and his face grew darker with each passing second. "Admiral Chen," Senior Chief Williams said, snapping to attention and saluting crisply. "Senior Chief Petty Officer Williams, I was not informed of your inspection visit, ma'am. Please accept my apologies for this situation." Admiral Chen returned the salute professionally. "At ease, Senior Chief. This was intended to be an unannounced inspection to observe normal operations. I would say we're certainly seeing normal operations, wouldn't you agree?" Sarcasm in her voice was barely detectable, but Jake caught it, and he was sure Senior Chief Williams did too. The senior enlisted man's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and Jake knew that Rodriguez was about to face consequences that would make his worst boot camp punishments seem like gentle suggestions. "Yes, ma'am," Senior Chief Williams replied. "Recruit Rodriguez, front and center." "Now." The command cracked across the mess hall like a whip, and Rodriguez jumped as if he had been struck. He stumbled forward, his legs clearly unsteady, and attempted to come to attention in front of Senior Chief Williams. His military bearing was completely shot, his uniform was disheveled from the confrontation, and his face still showed the shock and fear of someone who had just realized their life was about to change dramatically. Jake found himself holding his breath as he watched the scene unfold. He had never witnessed anything like this during his time in boot camp. Seeing a recruit face immediate consequences for such a serious breach of conduct was both terrifying and educational. Every lesson about military discipline, respect for authority, and proper conduct was being demonstrated in real time. Admiral Chen looked around the mess hall at all the frozen recruits. Her gaze swept across the room, taking in every face, every expression, every detail of how the future sailors were handling this crisis. Jake felt her eyes pass over him briefly, and even that momentary contact made him straighten his posture and tighten his grip on his tray. "Senior Chief," Admiral Chen said, still looking around the room, I think this presents an excellent teaching moment for these recruits. With your permission, I would like to address them about what they have just witnessed. Of course, Admiral, Senior Chief Williams replied immediately. Recruits, attention on deck. Admiral Chen will address you. The sound of 100 trays being carefully set down and 100 pairs of heels coming together echoed through the mess hall. Jake snapped to attention with the rest of his fellow recruits, his eyes focused straight ahead but his mind racing with thoughts about what had just happened and what it meant for all of them. Admiral Chen stepped forward slightly, her presence commanding the attention of everyone in the room without effort. When she spoke, her voice carried clearly to every corner of the mess hall, and Jake found himself hanging on every word. Recruits, she began, you have just witnessed a complete failure of military discipline, respect, and basic human decency. You have seen a future sailor assault a superior officer because he made assumptions based on appearance and allowed his emotions to override his training and judgment. She paused, letting her words sink in. Jake could feel the tension in the room like a physical weight. Every recruit was processing not just what they had seen, but what it meant for their own understanding of military service and conduct. This incident will be thoroughly investigated, Admiral Chen continued. But I want all of you to understand something very clearly. The Navy is not just about learning to operate ships and weapons systems. It is about learning to be better human beings. It is about discipline, respect, honor, and the courage to do what is right, even when it is difficult. Jake felt the power of her words resonating through him. This was not just a lecture about military protocol. This was a lesson about character and the kind of person the Navy expected him to become. The Admiral's gaze swept across the room again. You will encounter people from all walks of life during your naval careers. You will work with officers and enlisted personnel of every rank, every background, every race, and every gender. Your ability to treat every person with respect and dignity while maintaining proper military bearing will determine not just your success in the Navy but your worth as human beings. The speech continued for several more minutes, covering topics of leadership, responsibility, and the consequences of poor judgment. Jake found himself thinking not just about Rodriguez and his catastrophic mistake, but about his own behavior and attitudes. How many times had he made assumptions about people based on their appearance? How many times had he let his emotions guide his actions instead of his training and better judgment? As Admiral Chen concluded her impromptu address, Jake realized that this morning's incident would stay with him for the rest of his naval career. He had learned more about leadership, discipline, and character in the past 20 minutes than in weeks of formal training. Sometimes the most powerful lessons came from witnessing failure rather than success. The mess hall remained silent as Admiral Chen finished speaking. Rodriguez was still standing at attention, but Jake could see that the man was barely holding himself together. His entire future hung in the balance, and everyone in the room knew it. The breakfast that had seemed so important just minutes before was now forgotten as the weight of the morning's events settled over everyone present. Senior Chief Williams stepped forward. Admiral, with your permission, I will escort Recruit Rodriguez to the company commander for immediate disciplinary action. Granted, Admiral Chen replied. I will want a full report on this incident within 24 hours, including any previous behavioral issues with this recruit. As Rodriguez was led away, his footsteps echoing hollowly in the silent mess hall, Jake couldn't help but feel a mixture of sympathy and disgust for his fellow recruit. The man had thrown away everything, his career, his future, his honor, in a moment of anger and poor judgment. It was a lesson that Jake knew he would never forget. 3 days had passed since the incident in the mess hall, and the entire training facility buzzed with tension. Jake Morrison found himself constantly thinking about what he had witnessed, replaying the scene over and over in his mind. The image of Rodriguez's face when he realized he had pushed an admiral was burned into his memory forever. During training exercises, during study periods, even during sleep, Jake couldn't escape the weight of that moment. The atmosphere among the recruits had changed dramatically. Conversations were more subdued, and everyone seemed hyper-aware of their behavior around any personnel they didn't immediately recognize. The story had spread throughout the entire base, growing and changing with each telling, but the core message remained the same. A recruit had physically assaulted an admiral, and his naval career was over. Jake was in the middle of a navigation class when Petty Officer Second Class Martinez appeared at the classroom door. The instructor immediately called the class to attention, and Martinez's eyes swept across the room before settling on Jake. "Recruit Morrison," Martinez called out. "Report to the company commander's office immediately. Bring your service record folder." Jake's stomach dropped. He had been dreading this moment since Tuesday morning. As one of the witnesses to the incident, he knew he would eventually be called to give a formal statement, but somehow he had hoped it might not happen. The thought of being questioned about what he had seen, of potentially having his words used in Rodriguez's court-martial, made him nervous in ways that combat training never had. "Aye, petty officer," Jake replied, gathering his materials and following Martinez out of the classroom. Behind him, he could hear his classmates whispering among themselves. Everyone knew why he was being summoned, and everyone was probably grateful it wasn't them. The walk to the company commander's office felt like it took forever. Jake's mind raced with questions about what he would be asked, how he should respond, and what consequences his testimony might have. He had never been involved in anything like this before, and the formal nature of a military investigation was completely foreign to him. The company commander's office was located in the administrative building, a gray concrete structure that housed all the bureaucratic functions of the training center. As they walked through the corridors, Jake noticed several officers and senior enlisted personnel moving with obvious purpose. The entire building seemed to hum with an energy that suggested important business was being conducted. Martinez knocked on the door marked Commander Patricia Hayes, Commanding Officer, and waited for permission to enter. When the call came, he opened the door and gestured for Jake to step inside. Commander Hayes was a woman in her early 40s, with graying hair pulled back in a regulation bun and sharp blue eyes that seemed to take in every detail of Jake's appearance instantly. She was seated behind a metal desk covered with paperwork, and Jake could see his service record folder among the documents spread across the surface. But Commander Hayes was not alone in the office. Seated in chairs facing her desk were Admiral Chen and a man Jake didn't recognize but whose uniform indicated he was a lieutenant commander. The Admiral looked exactly as composed as she had 3 days earlier, showing no signs of stress or concern about the incident that had brought them all together. "Recruit Morrison," Commander Hayes said, gesturing to an empty chair. "Please have a seat. This is Admiral Chen, whom you've already encountered, and Lieutenant Commander Johnson from the Naval Criminal Investigative Service. They have some questions about what you witnessed on Tuesday morning." Jake sat down carefully, trying to maintain proper military bearing despite his nervousness. The presence of an NCIS investigator confirmed what everyone had already suspected. This wasn't just a simple disciplinary matter. Rodriguez was facing serious criminal charges, and Jake's testimony would be part of a formal investigation that could send a man to military prison. Admiral Chen leaned forward slightly. "Recruit Morrison, I want you to understand that you are not in any trouble. You are here as a witness to help us understand exactly what happened on Tuesday morning. Your honesty and accuracy in recounting the events will be crucial to ensuring justice is served properly." Lieutenant Commander Johnson opened a digital recorder and placed it on the desk between them. "This interview is being recorded for accuracy. Please state your full name, rank, and service number for the record." Jake complied, his voice steadier than he had expected. Something about the formal nature of the proceedings actually helped calm his nerves. This wasn't personal. It was official business, and he had a duty to tell the truth regardless of how uncomfortable it made him. "Recruit Morrison," Johnson continued. "Please describe in your own words what you observed on the morning of Tuesday, October 15th, in the main mess hall of this facility." Jake took a deep breath and began to recount the events as he remembered them. He described arriving at the mess hall for breakfast, going through the serving line, and first noticing what appeared to be a confrontation near the coffee station. He talked about seeing Rodriguez approach Admiral Chen, though at the time he hadn't known who she was. "At what point did you realize something serious was happening?" Admiral Chen asked. When Rodriguez started raising his voice, Jake replied, "At first I thought maybe someone had cut in line or something minor like that." But his tone was really aggressive, and the person he was talking to, you, Admiral, seemed so calm about it. The hall remained completely silent, but Jake could feel the collective intake of breath from hundreds of recruits processing the severity of Rodriguez's punishment. 6 months in prison and a discharge that would follow him for the rest of his civilian life. It was exactly as serious as everyone had expected, but hearing it officially announced made it feel more real and final. Admiral Chen continued her address, but Jake found his mind wandering to thoughts of Rodriguez himself. Where was he now? Had he been transferred to military prison already? What was going through his mind as he faced the consequences of those few moments of anger and poor judgment in the mess hall? The defendant showed no remorse for his actions during the court-martial proceedings. Admiral Chen was saying, and Jake's attention snapped back to her words. Even when given multiple opportunities to apologize or explain his behavior, he continued to justify his actions and show disrespect for military authority. This lack of character and accountability made his punishment both necessary and appropriate. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. He had hoped that maybe Rodriguez had learned from his mistake and shown some growth during the legal proceedings. The fact that he had remained defiant even in the face of overwhelming evidence and consequences spoke to a deeper character flaw that made Jake grateful he wouldn't have to serve alongside the man. However, Admiral Chen continued, "I did not come here today simply to announce a punishment. I came to discuss what this incident means for all of you as future sailors in the United States Navy." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the assembled recruits. When her eyes passed over Jake's section, he felt as if she was speaking directly to him. "Every one of you will face moments in your naval career when you must choose between taking the easy path and doing what is right.